Today's podcast episode is about an issue that's very deep and personal for most people watching. It's about hyper optimizing productivity. What do we mean by this? In most instances, all of us who have set goals in the past or have aspirations to achieve specific things that we want to achieve can relate to the experience of like curating the perfect schedules, building the perfect routines to get to where we want to be. For example, if someone wants to get a really good score in the SAT, as a lot of 11th graders and 10th graders do, probably spent a lot of time like curating the perfect routine to get there, making the perfect schedule, making the perfect checklist of things that you need to get done with. But the problem often ends up being, as is perpetuated in society, that this does not tend to work in most instances. In most cases, you're just left paralyzed and left overwhelmed at the end of this. And on today's episode, what me and Adyant want to talk to you about is how this problem has developed over time, what are the reasons why this problem exists, and like what has caused it to become a bigger issue, and how we can work towards fixing it as people who are learning from this problem and learning from the actions that are caused by this problem in our daily lives. Adyan, what are your thoughts on how this problem has come about to be in today's age?
Yeah. So before talking about why this problem has come about, it's important to note that on this podcast we aren't saying that all schedules are bad or that you shouldn't plan how your day looks like. We think that oftentimes it's very important to plan what your day looks like so you have some sort of direction and you realize what your goals are for that day before you actually start working. Otherwise, you often end up wasting time and working on things that don't actually matter. What we are saying, however, is that you should be more flexible when you're making those schedules. So, for example, if you aren't able to perfectly stick to those schedules, you should be adaptable and should be able to change your schedule a little bit and continue working towards the broader goals that you had in mind. And then you should find what works for you. So oftentimes schedules don't work for every single person. Maybe like you need a greater degree of flexibility during the day. Maybe it doesn't work for you that like maybe planning what you need to do at the beginning of the day doesn't work for you. So we think that you should be like finding what works for you instead of looking at what works for others and automatically implementing it in your life. That being said, I think the reason that this problem exists largely is because of the pressure that social media has put. So, currently, across the past 10 or 15 years, the rise of teenagers going online on social media and spending increasingly more time on social media and using social media as a large source of information has caused most people to be exposed to influencers that like tell you that you need a schedule, for example, or you need to plan your goals at the beginning of the day, or you need to work very hard to achieve your goals. And most of this is correct. The problem is that people still have a natural tendency to procrastinate because most people just don't tend to want to actually put in the work because it feels difficult and it feels tiring and exhausting, and it's much more convenient and comfortable to talk to your friends or to go down and play a sport, for example. So most people want to feel like they're doing work because influencers tell them that they should be working and that's what's going to get them somewhere. But they don't actually want to put in the work because that's far too inconvenient for them. So what they reach at is a sort of a compromise where they make the schedule to work and they feel like they're putting in some amount of work and moving in the right direction. But they don't actually do the meatiest part of it, which is actually putting in the work and getting towards the goal that they're aspiring to. So what's important isn't as much as like it isn't making the schedule of the calendar that isn't the most important part. The most important part is actually putting in the work that helps you get closer to wherever you want to be.
Fair enough. And I think a lot of it has also stemmed from like day in the life videos that you see online perhaps. Or like here's a guide to being productive as someone who's a 25-year-old millionaire. And you see people that you might want to be like in the future, or you see people who like set standards for you that you might want to aspire to. And eventually that leads you to like sort of adapt the habits that they have. But often like if you see them doing something like taking an ice bath, or if you see them doing something like taking a magnesium supplement because that helps them like be more productive or whatever, oftentimes you think that like once you incorporate this into your own life, this will also help you the same way it's helping them. But usually you don't see the effort that they put in behind the scenes before they actually got successful in the first place. Maybe you haven't seen the other factors that like cause them to be successful. Maybe they have certain privileges that they can like exercise that allow them to be like a more successful person. These are all things that you don't really notice, especially when it's like short form content, which is most prevalent in society right now. And I think what a lot of that does is like you sort of infer that like these are conditions that you need in your daily life to also succeed. And I think in a lot of instances, these just tend to be like a waste of time. Adyan, do you think like there's like a certain situation in which this is applied to you, like in your normal life as well?
Yeah, so I think this is like particularly relevant, especially for like these motivational clips and reels that you see a lot on social media, where they encourage you, for example, to get up early in the morning at like 3 or 3:30 in the morning and train, where they tell you that, for example, like you can survive on like 5 or 5.5 hours of sleep. Like I think it's very important to take like the most important bits of those videos. That is that working hard is important, but not take those videos absolutely at face value. So for example, like for me, working out in the evenings tends to be far more productive, and like my body feels more open when I'm working out in the evenings. So I think that taking the important bits of what these reels are and the message these reels are trying to send, and incorporating it in your own life in a way that fits like your schedule and the way that works the best for you, that's very important. And this is even for influencers that genuinely try to bring out the best content that they can and tell you what they're doing. Even if like these people are genuinely working hard at 3 or 4 in the morning, it's that oftentimes this same thing doesn't work for you. So even if they're generally doing it just like their situation just might be different from yours, or their context might be different from yours. And I think in addition to that, it's also true that there's a lot of instances where influencers show the entire picture of what they're doing. So, for example, they show that they're both working hard, and on top of that, they're taking ice baths. But because you want to feel like you're working, you often pick the most convenient bits of that to follow. So, for example, you only take magnesium supplements and you only have a high protein diet without working nearly as hard as they are in the gym, because that's often the most difficult or the tiring part of the work that they're putting in. And then you expect to get half the results that they're getting, without realizing that the reality of the work lies in like the hardest part of the work that you've actually been avoiding. So I think that like in like most of what they're saying is true. It's just that you can't pick and choose what parts of what they're saying to choose, like to follow. Like you should be doing the hardest parts of the work that you know you should be doing. It's not that like you shouldn't be like picking the easiest parts to do or the most convenient parts to do for yourself.
That's fair. And I also think on the subjectivity part of what you were talking about, I think that's very true because I have this friend who's preparing for a very important examination right now. And I was talking to her about this whole scheduling thing, and I was telling her like how I schedule my day, for example, like at what time I do what. And for her, like she was telling me, like it seems very overcomplicated to do all of this. And usually, like she also like balances sports, for example, alongside her studying. So for her, what tends to work is just like winging it, like setting like specific goals and like knowing what she needs to work towards, and then just like working when she feels like it's right, when she feels like she doesn't want to procrastinate anymore. So for example, studying late into the night if that feels good. And I feel like that's like an edge that you might lose if you're trying to emulate what others are doing. Because for instance, if you see an influencer who like sleeps at 10:30 p.m. and wakes up at like 5 a.m. every single day and does like an hour of deep work every morning, presumably if you're someone who's just not conditioned to like think well in the morning, or if you have issues like sleeping that early into the night, presumably you probably shouldn't be doing that if you want to be really, really productive. And I think that's very harmful as well. And talking about the thing that you mentioned about like people picking the path that's most convenient for them, I also think like the reason this is a trap that like most people cannot notice is that it makes you feel like you're being productive. Like even if you're not studying, and like even if you're not someone who's like actually doing the running of your running plan that you've developed over the next 30 days, presumably once you set up this plan or once you decide the schedule that you want to follow, like that'll make you feel like you're actually doing something to achieve that goal, and like towards getting to the step that's like the final milestone that you want to achieve. But at the end of the day, like the only thing that can get you there is like doing the work in the first place, which is like the part that I think most people miss out on, because it's such a good feeling, like it's such an instant dopamine hit that you get from like saying like from tomorrow morning every single day for an hour I'm gonna study like math every morning because I want to get better at it, as opposed to like just sitting down and doing the math itself. So I think that that's a trap that like traps too many people, and I think it's a very easy way for most people to like just hide their procrastination and feel good about it, because like there's procrastination in the conventional sense of like I know I need to get better at math in the next 2 weeks because I have an exam coming up, but I'm like doing something that's completely unrelated to that, as opposed to I am doing things that are like related to the end goal that I want to achieve, without even like in a lot of cases probably not even realizing that like you're not doing anything useful towards that. So I think that's a very harmful part of it that like goes unspoken of, and like I think that's something that like needs to be addressed as well. Like I think that's a pretty big problem.
Yeah, so I think like that's particularly dangerous to think that you're getting closer to an end goal when you're actually not getting closer because you're avoiding the majority of the work. And I think also another way that people often avoid doing the work is they often try to hide behind creating the perfect conditions for them like putting in the work. without realizing that the most important part is doing the work itself. So for example, like they want like the perfect like lighting in a room, they want to feel perfect, they want to feel like they're doing the work. If they feel like if their mood is off, for example, or they just had an argument with their friend or their family, they don't feel like doing the work at that point, so they'll just avoid it and move like push it to the next day. So there's this like whole range of like they're waiting for the perfect condition to like begin working. They're waiting to feel the perfect thing, they're waiting to like for their environment to be perfect. And oftentimes that just isn't going to happen, or it's going to happen very few times. And if you keep waiting for those instances to come, you're often not going to be able to put in the work that you need to. So I think it's very important for people to realize that you don't have to wait for the perfect conditions to begin working, and it's important to start working even if you don't have those perfect conditions. It's important to like work even when you don't feel like working, or even when, for example, like you're feeling tired, or you're at the end of a long day. Even in those cases, it's important to put in the work, because that's what's actually going to get you somewhere, and not waiting for the perfect time to work, because that often won't come. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I agree. And I also think like a lot of it is just like not being used to the feeling of starting something new, especially if it's difficult. Like I think for a lot of people it's very important to understand, and I think like even for us to a very large extent, that feeling intimidated when you want to start something difficult is like very, very normal, right? Like it's very normal to feel like you're not ready, and it's very normal to feel like something is insanely difficult. Like if I know that I have a math exam in 3 weeks, and like there is a specific chapter that I haven't started yet that I know is hard. For example, if it's a calculus chapter, I'm probably going to be scared of studying that chapter, and I probably want to procrastinate. But I think that's a feeling that like we need to like in general get more used to and get like comfortable with, because I think if you can get comfortable with being uncomfortable and putting yourself in situations where you don't want to be, I think that's when the real magic happens. Because like in most instances, you're probably not going to find a situation where like there'll be a magical moment where you'll finally be like, all right, now like I feel ready now. It's probably not going to work that way, because like in most instances you're probably still going to feel slightly intimidated. You're probably, I mean, in a week, the fact that that's a new chapter won't change, right? Like that's still going to be the same condition. So there's not going to be any magic pill that's given to me that like makes it easier in the future. At one point, you have to have the willpower to just start. And I feel like it's important to realize that like there isn't a magical moment where like that willpower suddenly comes to you. It's something that you just like need to take the first step like towards. And I think that's what builds the ability to take that first step more often and try new things a lot more. And I think that's where like a lot of people get it wrong, where it's like you wait for the perfect moment, even though you probably inside know that like that perfect moment is never going to come, but you still keep waiting for it. And I think that's the part that like kills most people's dreams and like crushes the expectation that you might have of what you can achieve, because you never like actually end up working hard. So I think that's a pretty like vicious like cycle that I think we need to work on ending.
Yeah, yeah, and I think the best way to actually deal with things that seem intimidating or hard at first is to just start doing them, because then you feel like you're at least then you realize that it isn't actually as hard as you thought, because constantly overplaying the fact in your head that this is something that's difficult or intimidating or daunting, that often makes it out to be much more difficult than it really is. And you have no idea how difficult it really is without you actually starting it. So oftentimes, if it's like a difficult maths chapter, for example, starting to study that maths chapter often makes like the process much easier. It makes you, for example, feel more accomplished that at least you finished like 5 or 10% of the most difficult maths chapter. You feel like you're getting closer to like the target that you want to achieve. You feel like it isn't as difficult as you imagined it to be. So instead of procrastinating and keeping the hardest tasks for the end, which require the most willpower, it's often important to start by doing the hardest tasks, because oftentimes then you realize that those things aren't actually as difficult as you imagined earlier. So it's less about like continuing to do these things once you've already started them, because then it sort of becomes like more muscle memory, it becomes habit. But it's like the hardest part is often starting these difficult tasks to begin with, and I think that's where most people struggle currently.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I also think a lot of it is just like, figuring out the fact that like your planning will also probably get better if you get started doing the thing. Like, it's very easy to watch YouTube videos from like your favorite influencers and then figure out like the perfect workout routine, like that's you lifting 6 times a week. But unless you actually start lifting and like understanding your body, for example, unless you actually start running in the evenings and then working out in the morning and then understanding how you're recovering, for example, or which exercises you like doing, and maybe some exercises like hurt your shoulder more than other exercises do. And I think those are very subjective pieces of nuance. that are very hard to understand unless you are the person that's performing the task itself. So there's a very limited amount of learning that you can do, especially when it comes to being productive, because everyone's so different. Like, as we said earlier, there's probably people who benefit immensely from having a perfectly curated routine that they can stick to so that they don't feel overwhelmed. But there's probably a significant majority of people who don't work that way. And I think, like, for people to understand that, you actually need to go out and do the thing and try it in the first place. So even if you're someone who likes to hyper optimize productivity, which I think I do to a certain extent, like I like to plan things out, I like to plan my day out, and I think that makes me feel a lot easier. Um, I think for those people as well, it's just a lot easier to plan your day or plan the task that you want to achieve if you're just like trying the thing in the first place. So you might build a perfect workout routine, but what if like your lower back hurts when you're doing deadlifts too much for you to actually do them consistently? Maybe you have an issue in your right shoulder for which you can't do like bench pressing, so you need to switch to another exercise to grow your chest, for example. Like there's a lot of different nuances that you need to undertake that like I think you can only do once you actually step out like outside of your comfort zone and you actually go out there and say, hey, I'm gonna try to like accomplish this thing that I really want, because at the end of the day, like unless you actually put in the work, you probably can't achieve that. And I also think a lot of the fulfillment that comes with being productive cannot come without doing the work. Like I feel like this sort of fulfillment that you get from this, like the dopamine reaction that you get from planning things out and like feeling like you have structure in a plan, is very temporary. Like I think that's the reason why most people who end up developing plans like this need to make a new one every single week, because like at the end of the day, that is a feeling that's going to go away because you can't make a new plan every day. Because sure, Saturday evening you created a new plan for next week, but when it comes to be Monday, when you realize that you actually have to do the work now and you don't do it, you'll probably spend that week making a new plan for the future and saying, oh no, like I really want that like dopamine release again. And I think that's a big problem. So I think like even if you're talking about the fulfillment that people get from productivity, I feel like it's very hard to get without actually being productive. So I think it's very easy to get caught in this trap of like, I will make a plan, then I'll make a new one next week, thinking that I'm doing better, even if I'm not. And I think that just ends up wasting a lot of time and energy. And it might make the task seem even more daunting because the less time you have to achieve it, presumably the harder it gets to like develop towards it and the more work that you have to put in, which means getting started is also harder. Like if the SAD was 6 months away versus being 3 months away, presumably I would have to do a lot more studying every single day for those 3 months. So I feel like that's the type of patterns and like cycles that you need to break in most instances.
Yeah. And I also think even for the few people that do end up starting tasks that seem difficult or challenging at first, it's often that they're discouraged very easily because the way they feel even after accomplishing something small isn't the way influencers think you should feel when they make like these motivational reels and edits and quotes with it just isn't the same, because these like reels and quotes make it seem like these people have endless motivation, that they never feel tired, that it's not hard for them to wake up early in the morning, that they feel like running every single morning, that they feel like putting in the work every single day, and that like they feel happy every time, like they're lifting more than they ever have lifted before. But that often isn't the reality. Like it's very difficult to wake up early in the morning and put in the work when you know like no one else is going to be awake at that time, and it's very difficult to do something that's challenging, especially when it tires you, and when it's often at the end of a long day when you don't feel like doing it at that point. So people also have to realize that they won't get the instant gratification that they're looking for, and that like reels and motivational videos tell them that they will be getting. Like the fulfillment isn't as immediate as reels make it seem like. It's often much more long term, so they have to put in the work consistently, and then they might or might not get that satisfaction later. So I think people have to be more prepared to recognize the fact that they won't get like this immediate sort of gratification that they're expecting, and it'll often take like longer than they think or expect that it should.
Yeah, and I also feel like most people have like too big of an expectation for like how much willpower that they actually have. Like you see all these motivational reels that tell you that like if you just get 1% better every day, you'll eventually figure out like the path that you want to take, and like you'll end up becoming the person who you want to be. Or the key to being successful is to just like be obsessed about what you want to achieve, for example. Like these are very common things that like people our age might see when they're trying to like find motivation online, for example. And I think the problem with that is you're never really told what happens when that isn't true. Like maybe in your pursuit to being 1% better every day, you failed, or when, for example, your progress isn't as linear as you thought it would be, or your progress isn't as like big as you thought it would be. Um, in these situations, you're never really taught like in a way how to fail, and I think that also ends up like damaging like a lot of people's perspective about productivity and about like being successful. And I think that's what also leads a lot of people to building these like complex schedules as well, because they feel like the next schedule like will be the reason um that they reached the like progress that they wanted to achieve. Like maybe the problem, maybe the reason they couldn't achieve what they wanted to earlier was because they didn't have the perfect plan, was because they didn't have the perfect routine, and this will change that. When in reality, like in most instances, winners are just losers who don't give up. But I think too many people like spend time changing their paths when the answer is just if you keep going, you'll probably get end up getting there. And I think that's like a very unfortunate reality that's like way too common, like for people our age.
Yeah, yeah, I agree. And I think the only way to solve it is genuinely to stop, like just put in the work. Like there's genuinely no other alternative, because most people like try to figure and circumvent putting in the actual work. So they try to procrastinate. They try to wait for the perfect conditions. They have like multiple like ways. They make schedules. They make calendars. They do everything apart from actually putting in the work. Like they think they'll feel good after putting in a bit of work. Most people have to realize that putting in the work often means it's going to be difficult and it's going to be long and tiring, and they have to be willing to accept that, because otherwise they're just going to be discouraged after putting in a bit of work and not seeing immediate results. And they have to be willing to consistently put in the work and often make sacrifices if they actually want to achieve like the goals that they've dreamt of achieving.
Yeah, and I feel like we might run the risk of sounding too convenient here, because like the answer to not doing work is just do the work. Like it's like if you can't afford a house, just like buy the house, bro.
Yeah,
And I think like honestly, what probably like what it probably manifests as in real life is just like find some small things that work for you, like things that might make you more productive. For example, like caffeine works for a lot of people. Like a lot of people work better when they're like caffeinated, and they drink coffee before working. Or maybe like working with like music in the background is something that might help you. Like I know a friend who like studies really well when she's listening to Taylor Swift um, in her headphones. So I think like if you just find some things that work for you, and like if you quit experimenting and realize that like the only way to achieve what he wants is to just do the thing, and like start with small steps that might lead you to doing larger and more difficult tasks in the future. I think that's the only way to fix this, right? Because like I think the first step to fixing this problem, or like rather the step that comes even before the first step, is like realizing that this is a problem, and realizing that you're constantly stuck in a cycle of like hyper optimizing all the time, where in a lot of instances, if you just like take a step back and like look at it from an objective perspective, you'll realize that like the progress you've made is way less than like the progress that you could have made if you spent your time just doing the work and like using the 2 to 3 things that work for you. So I think in an age where like stuff like this, especially on social media, is unavoidable to a certain extent, like morning routines, day in the life videos, if they're unavoidable, then like extrapolating what works for you, experimenting with that in real life, and like trying to see what works, and then eventually just like adjusting your own productivity based on that, I think is what like will help most people. And I think that's what like will lead for most people to be more productive.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it. I think we've had a pretty good conversation about hyper optimizing productivity, and maybe there's a future episode to be made about this, where we can talk about if these solutions have worked for us in our daily lives as well, because like we're also realizing this just now, and like realizing how big of a problem this is, for example. So yeah, maybe there's a future episode coming about how to like fix this problem further. But yeah, something that I think most people need to realize.
Yeah.
Right.